Two. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to St. James Presbyterian Church here in the village of Harlem in the city of New York, where we are preparing for our Bible study here on the 30. Actually, we're no longer in ordinary time. I'm so sorry for that on our lectionary calendar schedule. It is the last Sunday of the lectionary because next week we move into Advent. But this is the last Sunday, which is now named Christ the King or Reign of Christ Sunday in year A. Here's where the educational stuff comes in about this particular Sunday that I want to share with you. I love this whole idea, this notion of the Reign of Christ Sunday. For those of us who were not born before 1925, we may think that this happened, in the 3rd century or the 4th century or sometime back in the old days when they were making all these church holidays. But this was actually created in 1925. Reign of Christ Sunday was created in 1925 by Pope Pius VI in response to secularism, or people running away from the church, and ultra-nationalism. And here are the two reasons behind that in terms of history. First is this thing called the Roman question. From 1859 to 1929, Italy itself fought to take over the Papal States. Now, that's not just the Vatican itself, but all of the other places in colonial places that the Vatican and the Catholic Church itself had colonized, which I did not know. So they fought to take over all of those states and Rome itself because the Pope was in charge of Rome. And this ultimately led to a standoff where Italy, the king and the government, proposed to rule over with secular laws over the Catholic seat of power. And back and forth and back and forth. And by 1929, Vatican City was finally established as a separate entity and was not beholden and is not beholden to Italian laws, thus separating itself as its own country. When did Vatican City become a country? The smallest country in the world? In 1929. It is encircled by a 2-mile border with Italy. Make sure that you hear that it is in Rome. It is a 2-mile border within Italy, although not in Rome. And it's important to note that it is not in the city of Rome, but it is in the country of Italy. It is the smallest country. It is a monarchy ruled by the Pope's self, smallest country in the world, covering just 100 acres, making it 1/8 the size of New York's Central Park. So that's the first reason this Pope Pius wanted to do this thing, was to say, we really want to focus on Christ's and our power being derived from Christ the King, and so on and so forth. But the other reason, number 2, is the First World War had ended in 1918. The First World War destroyed empires and created new nation states and encouraged independence among all of the European colonies. And it forced the United States to actually become a world power and led directly to the Soviet Union, to their communism and to the rise of Hitler. So the second most likely religio-political reason adopted by those outside of Catholicism is this second one, which is why we as Presbyterians and other Reformed denominations celebrate Christ the King Sunday. For the PCUSA Church, we've taken even that mandate of it being non-secular and all that other stuff, and we've translated it and looked at it as this. The PCA Church, the church gives thanks and praise for sovereignty of Christ, who is Lord of all creation and is coming again in glory to reign. It ends in ordinary time and thus begins the season of Advent, waiting for both Christ's birth and Christ's return. So this Sunday that has been on the calendar for years has sort of a human background as to why it was made. And I just wanted you to realize that when you see this on the calendar, and for those of you who are not Presbyterian or Catholic, that this is celebrated by millions of people. And millions of people may not know that this was sort of put together so that the church would be able to raise itself in terms of its own power, that it was losing politically in the world in the early 1900s. So that's what this Sunday is all about, and the scriptures sort of uplift that. So it starts this year with Psalm 105. And Psalm 105 is a call to the nations to worship the Lord. It's a hymn that echoes the enthronement psalms that focus on God's eternal kingship, like Psalm 93 and 95 through 99. Here, Psalm 100. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness and come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is God. It is he that made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and bless his name. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. There are 7 invitations to worship here in this 5-verse Psalms. And you hear it in these words. Worship, make a joyful noise, worship, come, know, enter, give thanks, and bless. So all of these are instructions written in these 5 verses to all of the nations. And notice that it is decidedly less nationalistic than the intent of this Sunday that we're using it for, but it calls all nations to God. The calling of all nations to God is different than exerting and trying to keep the power of the church. And this is just a note from my perspective with a church history lens. But more importantly, I like to look at this as an invitation, to be seen as an invitation to others and to other nations to recognize God's kingship. Why? Simply because God is just so good. So without exerting all of this better than you or better than that, you need to come and taste and see the glory of this God that we worship. And that is why all the nations must come to God, because this God is the one true God who is good. We are the sheep of his pasture. The motives for giving praise in this are introduced in this psalm by the word that in verse 3a. It is he that made us. This is why we worship. And the word for in 5a. For the Lord is good. This is very detailed understanding about how this is constructed. And then it's also a psalm that is written in parallel sections, expressing different verses 1 through 3 and 4 through 5 express different sentiments and different words. Verse 4 also talks about a pilgrimage to Mount Zion as found in other psalms. And the Psalter lays great stress on worshiping God with joy. And one of the most important phrases in this that people would be reminded of in the time of Psalms, in the time of when these are being written and when Israel is among all of these other nations around them, is that the sheep that the Lord personally pastures here and is not delegating it to anyone else. If you remember that the God, the shepherd, the king being the shepherd, is a very prevalent theme, and a prevalent theme in Near Eastern society. This is what kings are supposed to be. They're supposed to represent shepherds. And in the terms of the people of Israel, that the kings represent a shepherd means that the kings are supposed to model care for people like God represents care for us. So they're saying, come all nations and represent that we are the sheep of this shepherd, this one shepherd who is God, who doesn't make the mistakes that humankind makes, who doesn't take your daughters and sends your men out to be killed. God is a different shepherd that brings you in, that feeds you and leads you beside still waters. So come, all nations, This is the true nature of understanding the lordship and the kingship of God. All of that in 5 verses. What do y'all think about that?
It all starts with singing.
Yes. Yes.
So maybe it's my perspective at this moment, but it all starts with worship the Lord in his presence with singing, and then goes from there to talk
Right.
about why. But yeah, it's singing is so important in all of this worship stuff, and you see it over and over, and this is just one of those times. So,
And I would like to add to that, Andrea, because it's very often when we hear these things, it's like, make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth, and make sure that we're singing. We often think about it just for us in the room and in the sanctuary. But this is a psalm for all of the nations to come and worship God. So we are instructed to make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth, for all the earth to hear. So we are to sing it out and sing it loud, not just for ourselves, but so that it resonates out into the world, that this praise is worth singing. And when the world hears us singing and lifting up praises to God, they cannot help but come and want to join in, because we are so full of the power and the spirit in our worship and praise with God. So that singing is this tool of evangelism, but it's also a tool of celebration, and it represents the echoing of when we lift up our voices in one to how good God is, how much that reverberates out into the world.
Great point. Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts on this? And I guess you can see why this call to the nations is the first psalm that they would have for this Christ the King Sunday, when we really want to focus on everyone turning their eyes towards God and towards, in 1929, Rome. Our second scripture is from the book of Ezekiel. The book of Ezekiel, chapter 34, verses 11 through 16 and verses 20 through 24. Ezekiel comes after the book of Lamentations. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and then there is Ezekiel. We know that Isaiah and Jeremiah are talking with people about having to go into exile, then saying that there's a way that we will be brought out of exile. It carries them through the whole process. Lamentations is the wailing and the, oh God, where are we? And things are so bad. And it's just the wringing of the hands and the ripping and the gnashing of your teeth and the wearing of sackcloth and just saying, God, we need you to hear our cry. Ezekiel is sort of another way of looking at this Babylonian exile, because it talks about it from a framework of what's that word? That word that we associate begins with an A. See, my brain is clogged. The one at the book of Apocalypse, and God's will being done on earth. It's a very apocalyptic in essence, in some phrases, just like the book of Daniel. But it all starts with this. If we remember that Ezekiel is of the upper echelon of the Jewish society. And the upper echelon of Jewish society is, of course, the priests. So when the Babylonian exile happened, it happened in several stages. First, it took the most influential people. It took all of the people from the priesthood. It took all of the spoils from the temple and destroyed the temple. And then after they got them settled, how can we sing our song in a strange land with, the priesthood? And then they went back and got the next layer of the next class of people that they would bring in. And those would be some of the people who were the artisans and the craftspersons and so on and so forth. And then they sort of like left the dregs out there in Jerusalem and Israel, just to sort of hang around all the ruins. Ezekiel is called by God in the most famous passageway to the Valley of the Dry Bones. And the important thing to remember about the Valley of Dry Bones is that he is looking at his ancestors, those who were brought over in the exile, who perished on the way over, in the first set of people that were brought over. So these are his direct relatives. So he is of this special relationship to this first group of people that were brought over. And so God speaks through and speaks to him. Here in this particular text, 11 through 16 especially, God, once again, is the good shepherd as God's self, who will gather the entire dispersed flock. Again, Israel's kings are symbolized by shepherds contracted by God to care for the people. They are to emulate and to look to God for how to do so. So hear this text from the book of Ezekiel for this particular Sunday. For thus says the Lord God, I myself will search for my sheep and will seek them out. As shepherds seek out their flocks when they are among their scattered sheep, so I will seek out my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places to which they have been scattered on a day of clouds and thick darkness. I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries and will bring them into their own land. And I will feed them on the mountains of Israel, by the watercourses, and in all the inhabited parts of the land. I will feed them with good pasture. And the mountain heights of Israel shall be their pasture. There they shall lie down in good grazing land, and they shall feed on rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep, and I will make them lie down, says the Lord God. I will seek the lost, and I will bring back the strayed, and I will bind up the injured, and I will strengthen the weak. But the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will feed them with justice. Therefore, thus says the Lord God to them, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, because you pushed with flank and shoulder and butted at all the weak animals with your horns until you scattered them far and wide. I will save my flock, and they shall no longer be ravaged. And I will judge between sheep and sheep. And I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he shall feed them. He shall feed them and be their shepherd, and I, the Lord, will be their God. And my servant David shall be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. This is very, very wonderful and powerfully written down piece of scripture. It gives you the understanding that if you remember, I'll give you an example that I remember from earlier in the Old Testament text. If you remember how many of the people would go to the well, if you remember Moses' wife, when Moses came out and all of those young ladies were at the well, getting water for the sheep, and the other shepherds came along and tried to claim those sheep. That very often happened. They tried to scatter them and they mixed them about to try and sort of steal them away. Very often while you need a shepherd and people being attentive to the sheep, is not just to guide them and lead them in, but also to protect them from being blended in with other shepherds who bring their flocks in to try and take yours away as well. So God is saying that there has been a day of clouds and thick darkness where all of the flocks got mixed up. But this day of the Lord that we're talking about here is the same as in Joel and Zephaniah. And it's the Babylonian exile to which God has separated God's own people. So he's talking about the metaphor that people would understand about sheep, but he's also letting it be applied to the fact that I have done this to you as well. But I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to bring you all back, all who are scattered. And then we get to this whole idea. That's not where I wanted to focus on. The focus shifts to God's care for the needy individuals within the flock and to God's judgment of particular sheep, not just their other shepherds under which they've been matriculated into. I will seek the lost and I will bring back the strayed and I will bind up the injured and I will I will strengthen the weak. And it always interests me when I was always reading this at first, it says, so you're going to bring back all of these sheep and you're going to take care of and seek the lost and take care of those who are injured and feed those. But the fat and the strong you're going to destroy? Why are you going to bring all these people back together just to take those who are fat and destroy those who are the strong ones? But then you realize that it's because those who are strong made themselves strong at the expense of the others. So these are the people who have gone along into the Babylonian exile, and the same as the people who align themselves, for example, when we do our Christian text with Rome, those people who decide to go along with those who are in power and make their own people suffer. I am going to take care of you and I am going to save my flock and they won't be ravaged between you. And this whole idea, let me see, I wanted to make sure I get to, this 17 through 24, in which we find ourselves within, there's a new order for Israel. God will purge out the oppressor sheep among the flock. In Ezekiel 20:38, he says, I will purge out the rebels among you and those who transgress against me. So he's revisiting that. I will bring them out of the land where they reside as aliens, but they shall not enter the land of Israel. Then you shall know that I am the Lord. So I'll disperse and I'll take care of that as well. Hear these words as well. Verses 23 through 24. I'm trying to find something that I want to get to. The sheep, where is that? I'll find that. Just want to make sure I'm getting everything that I need to. God will install a new Davidic ruler, their shepherd, one king over an undivided nation. We do know that part of the reason why Israel was conquered by the Babylonians is because they were sort of, after David, died and two of his sons were fighting over stuff, and then there was one in the north and one in the south, and even before that, David sort of brought them back together, but they were still fighting among who would be leaders. And he said, no, we're going to be one nation, indivisible, and there will be one undivided king. This unknown leader is an appointed one to be anointed. When he says, my servant David, it's very clear to remember that David has been long dead and gone. There will not be another Davidic king over Israel ever. This is the time when this is the last of the reign of David physically that is able to be called king over Israel. Right before they came into this exile, there's no longer really in the history books a Davidic line. So for when Ezekiel says, I will set them up, my servant David, and he shall feed them and be their shepherd. My servant David is a Messiah from the Davidic line, of course, which we Christians have named what? We've named and realized as Jesus. So all of the Jews who are still without and around this disparate part of the world in the diaspora, when you hear people saying, we're waiting for the Messiah, it is the one that will be anointed as of the Davidic line, saying, you come down from David and God has anointed you to bring your people together, and that is when God's will be done. But we, as Christians, claim on this Christ the King Sunday that it already is. So there is that. I wanted to, maybe it's in another text, but I thought I saw it here. The lost, I want to just make sure one thing. No, this is it. Okay, that's all of my context for that particular one. There's so many similar things in these texts. That's why I had to make sure I had all of my context correct. So here now, you've heard now this Ezekiel text. What are your thoughts on this?
A lot of it sounds like the 23rd Psalm to me, talking about lying down in the grazing land and all of that. But also, I was just going to ask, is there another place where there's a reference to Jesus being the David in the story, in the Bible at all, or in the Old Testament? Or
you know what's really funny? There's always the claim of a Messiah that will come from the Davidic line. But because the Davidic line has been sort of erased, everyone who comes and says that they are Messiah is claiming to be that.
I see.
So, I mean, I've said this before, but some of you may not have heard this from who have been joined us recently within the past year. At the time of Jesus, there were about 3 or 4 recorded persons who were vying to be Messiah at the very same time. So Jesus was not the only one sort of in the time period that was named as Messiah. There were others that were self-proclaimed Messiahs that were running around and that were doing signs and miracles as well. So there's this great anticipation waiting for this Messiah to come. And the way that the text that we have with Jesus, and that Jesus took precedent over that, our claim that Jesus is the Messiah and our Savior, and that he got up from the dead and that he did all of this, we hold that to say that this is a fulfillment of the Messiah prophecies. But that is not the meaning of the texts that were written. They weren't written predicting Jesus, they were predicting a Messiah for the Jewish people. And that's why I won't say they won't in terms of that pejorative way, but that's why in Judaism and many other places, Jesus is not, he's a prophet, but he's not the Messiah. And we just take issue with that because we believe otherwise. I had this highlight here on a day of clouds and thick darkness. I would like to point that out as a metaphor for the ways in which persons and which entities try to scatter people and try to separate people and confuse people from recognizing that they are one sheep in one pasture, bring about days of clouds and thick darkness. I love that as a prophetic metaphor for the powers and principalities, that all of this fighting that we end up doing, even within our own communities, if you were to look and see who is putting over these clouds and thick darkness to separate us. And maybe that's why the image of calling for the light to shine upon us, so that that can be dispersed, so that we can find our pastures, find our sheep, find our flock, and therefore understand that there's enough for all and a pasture for all, and that there is one shepherd. I love this as a metaphor to start using for what I see happening, even in our Senate and Congress and school boards. A day of clouds and thick darkness laid upon us purposefully to separate us, separating people by those in power. And in a very strange way that doesn't mean that they really shouldn't be, and making us fight against one another, is really just a tool to keep them in power. And we often fall prey to it because we're thinking that we're fighting over the same bone. I think I've said this before. In Martin Luther King's time period of the civil rights, there's this great poster, and there's a poor white dog and a poor black dog fighting over this bone. And the persons, who are in control, like the government and so on and so forth, are standing over them, watching them with a smile, fighting over this bone, but behind them is a pile of bones up into their hips. So the goal is to keep you fighting over the bone so that you will be distracted from what they are gathering behind them. Day of clouds and thick darkness. Any other thoughts that you might have around this? I do see encouragement that God will seek the lost.
Yes.
And bring back the strayed. Mm-hmm. And bind up those who are injured. And if we feel weak, that we will be strengthened. I like the idea that there is a period after, but the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will feed them with justice. That means all of us get fed with justice. Those of us who are suffering and those of us who are oppressors. I will feed all of my flock with justice. And the idea that why these fat ones will be destroyed, when you see a group of people, I love this image of sheep, fat sheep, pushing them with their flanks and shoulders and butting all of the weak sheep until they scatter them far and wide and get them lost so that they fall off of the cliff, or that there isn't a verdant pasture or high pasture for them to graze upon, and that they don't get to the cool, still waters. And I wrote a call to confession when the 23rd Psalm was our scripture for the day at one point in time, as that is what the sins to which we must confess. Where are we, the sheep of the pasture, sort of pushing out those who need to be in the center and need to be healed? And we push those who are weak out to the foxes on the edge. And this reminds me of that, I want to call it a poem, but that confession that I wrote is that we are called to look out for those who are weak and bring them to the center, because the foxes and those and the predators, usually for big flocks like that, they don't go after the strong. They only go after the weak.
Yes.
So this imagery is really powerful.
And I like the line, I will judge between sheep and sheep. Because it says to me that they can all be called the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm called a sheep, I'm called Democrat, and I'm called a Democrat, and I'm called a Republican, and I'm called a Republican, or whatever the designation is. I'm called a Presbyterian, and I'm called a Presbyterian. But there are differences.
Yeah.
In the people, in the sheep, in the flock, and just it's like kind of a vengeance is mine, says the Lord kind of line.
Yeah.
But to call them sheep and sheep is just kind of profound, as opposed to sheep and goats, or
right. And once I pull back all who have been scattered.
Yes.
All who have been set apart and brought out, I will bring all of my sheep back together. And then after that, I, as the shepherd who know you one by one,
right,
separate you sheep by sheep.
Right.
Because a sheep knows the voice of its shepherd, and the shepherd knows its sheep.
Right.
Ooh, you better go ahead.
And what's the plural of sheep?
Sheep.
Sheep.
Right. Exactly. So it's a singular sheep or it's a
Mhm.
plural sheep?
Oh, I see those sheep. Oh, that's those sheep over there. They're different from those sheep over there. And even in those sheep over there, that sheep is different from that sheep.
But
Right.
they're all God's sheep.
Yep.
There you go.
God is the shepherd,
There you
and
go.
they're all his sheep.
Yes. Yes. Each one and all.
Yeah. So here is where I'm talking about that you have this apocalyptic nature of understanding that God, when God is ready, remember I always talk about in the New Testament how evil is here, evil is up here, and good is down here, and then it flips, and that's what we're working for. This is the same apocalyptic notion here that we're talking about, is that God is going to bring everything together, and God is going to look at people sheep by sheep and judge them sheep by sheep, one by one. And this makes entrance for the ways and the will of God to do for God's sheep what God has intended to do for God's sheep all along. Oof.
All in the seldom quoted Bible book of the Bible, Ezekiel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So much power in the words.
It really is. Wow. Sheep. Well, I'm grateful for this particular passage, and I can't wait to read more of this over the week and study this in between what I'm preparing for Thanksgiving.
I'm just going back to, the promises, that on verse 15, it's like, and 16, it's like, wow.
That line, I will be the shepherd of my sheep, and I will make them lie down.
And seeking the lost. Jesus talked about that.
Where do you think he got it from? Where do you think? Now, so do you see the similarities? This is what I love about doing these textual studies with people. It's like, you know that the people who were writing the Gospels are Jewish. And you know that they were very familiar with these texts. And you also know that Jesus was familiar with these texts. And Jesus, understanding being the Son of God and being the Son of Man, which we'll talk about a little bit later, understanding all of that, he knows that this is the language that he can use, that is the holy language that he can claim, that will have people understanding what his point is and what his purpose is.
And not only that, it would confound the leaders of the temple. As soon as they heard that, I mean, the peasant people might have, needed some time, but those leaders of the temple would have been like, wait, what? I could see the different sects, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes all, debating with one another. What did he mean by that? What is he trying to say? Is he saying he's the Messiah? What is he saying here? Yeah.
I would love to compare those two verses with the verses where Jesus says, when they say, well, when did we see you and not feed you and not clothe you? Because it's this whole idea of, when did you butt me out? And when did you bring me in? And when did you not act on God's will for me to be brought back, to not stray, to be bound up, to be strengthened? It's an interesting parallel. It's an interesting connection to the entire way of justice of being with God's people, that we are called to be with one another. That brings it into this whole idea that this is what God says that God will do, and we are to do this, and you're not doing it. So
this was his whole ministry. 15 and 16 was his whole ministry. And when just a few weeks ago, we heard him say, love God and love our neighbor. And that's exactly what 15 and 16 are talking about.
And Lisa, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because guess what the gospel lesson is? The gospel is Matthew 25.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, and I'll explain that when we get to it, and some of you can speak to that as well. So I love the security that God has with these people who, even though they have been in exile and even though that they have been led astray, and it's the leadership that caused them to go into exile, so on and so forth, that God tells everyone who's been away for a while, it's all going to be all right. I'm going to sort it out. Just like God sorted out the generations in the wilderness, right? God's pretty good at sorting out. Ooh.
How many years were they in exile?
Oh my gosh, I forget.
That 400? No.
No, not 400 years, but it was several generations. I think it was was it 100? I can't remember off the top of my head. But it was quite something. And I'll look that up a little bit later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's somewhere too.
But that's why we know that it was a long period of time, because there were like all of these different pieces of people that were brought over and resettled and brought over and resettled and brought over and resettled, so that there was only a remnant left in Jerusalem in the ruins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was reading some information about, oh goodness, the land of Naphtali and Zebulun.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about the history of that area, which includes where the Gaza Strip is.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's been through so many hands,
Yeah.
so many people. I mean, if you're standing back away from it, you can't say that the Jews or the Arabs or any tribe really owns that land. It's whoever God wants to be there at the particular moment,
Mm.
It wasn't that long then. It was only about 3 generations.
What I find intriguing or amazing is how, even though the Jewish people were doing wrong by God, the text of the Torah remained with them throughout these exiles and, all of this other stuff that was going on.
Yeah. Kept it there somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, what they're saying in some of when I'm being able to go through in some of my files, is that it was really about 70 years, so 3 generations.
Oh. Yes. That's meaningful.
Not hundreds, but 70 years, yeah.
Oh, that 400 or something else, yeah, another.
There would be generations in their lifetime average.
Yeah.
Not ours.
But if you can just imagine, so you can imagine how dry and brittle those bones are from the first that were brought over in the Valley of Dry Bones. Ezekiel.
We sing about that. You've heard that gospel, right?
Yeah. He saw the wheel.
So the wheel.
So this new Davidic ruler is one that they are waiting to come and to guide them and to lead them and to rule over them, because they don't know how it's going to come, since David and his people are gone. But since the formal monarchy of David and all his kids and all those generations and generations. I mean, Solomon, for goodness sake, had all those concubines. There are a lot of them running around. So, all right, are we ready to move to our epistle reading? We are moving to the writing of Paul to the people of, I heard someone pronounce it this way the other day, Ephesus.
Oh, Ephesus.
I know it was at an ordination service the other day, and the minister was saying when he would start preaching, he was like, "Yeah, these are to the people of Ephesus." I was like, "Oh, okay." You know, when people say this, it's like, "Well, I don't care what they're gonna call it, it's Ephesus to me."
Well, yeah.
Exodus, the reading that you know that when Paul begins these letters to people to communities, that he really starts out by flattering them. So if you keep that in mind, here we are, excuse me, but also keep in mind that we are doing this for Christ the King Sunday. You'll hear those themes, but this is there's a Thanksgiving prayer for wisdom and power. So it's a prayer for these people, which you can go into when you read into why this was written and so on and so forth, why they needed it, but that's what this is and where we're at. I have heard of your faith in the Lord Jesus and your love toward all saints. And for this reason, I do not cease to give thanks for you as I remember you in my prayers. I pray that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation as you come to know him, so that with the eyes of your heart enlightened, you may know what is the hope to which he has called you, what are the riches of his glorious inheritance among the saints, and what is the immeasurable greatness of his power for us who believe, according to the working of his great power. God put his power to work in Christ Jesus when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the age to come. And he has put all things under his feet and has made him the head over all things for the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills in all. Okay. Spirit of wisdom. I love this. First of all, where is this thing? Faith and love. There we go. I should have done this too. I've heard of your faith in the Lord Jesus and your love towards all saints. Faith and love is really a nice dual phrase if you want to think about how is Paul trying to get these new communities to be. These are two central virtues that has been instilled in Christ communities that Paul lays out and sets up. This faith and love. Faith and love. You see it practiced, and especially in the book of Corinthians, of course, we all know that faith and love are really important. So he brings that here also in the book of Ephesians. I pray that the Father may give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation. What that means, wisdom and revelation, is the ability to understand God's purposes. And I will frame that in this context that these are people who, whether they are Jewish or whether they are Gentiles or whether they're a mix of people, many are very foreign to really understanding what the purposes of God may be. So you are in a process as you grow in Christ that God's purposes will be revealed and you will be able to manifest them in your life. So I pray that this spirit of wisdom and revelation comes to you, that you're able to understand this as you grow. 19, an emphatic assertion that the same power that raised Jesus is available to the church to live out his calling, the immeasurable greatness of his power for us who believe, according to the working of his great power. Last week, in the last few weeks in the book of Thessalonians, this would have been an emphatic assertion that the power that raised Jesus Christ is the same power that was going to raise us. Paul shifts it here. And if you can imagine the power that it took to raise Jesus Christ, he's saying that same type of power, that same efficacy of power is available to you as the church to live out your calling as the church. I find that, oh boy, when I read that and put those two together, I was like, that is something that we got to pray for. That is something that we need to request from God in our time. Let the same power that raised Jesus Christ be available to us to live out our calling. Imagine the work that we can do when we tap into that. Remember that God put his power to work in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand. At his right hand, this commentary says it was derived from Psalm 110. It's a common early Christian, what I always use the term for Paul, a Christ follower community. It's early description of Christ's exaltation, his elevation in terms of power and kingship for our purposes today. But for our purposes as kingship in terms of this power thing. The whole idea in Psalm 110 is that the right-hand side of anything is a place of power. So if you are seated to the right of any monarch, and even in science fiction movies, when you see like a powerful king, or even if you were to look at Black Panther, and you would to see one of those scenes where the royalty, Angela Bassett, is seated on the throne. Whoever is to the right is the one that has the most power. It is the one to which succession will come, most likely. It is the one who is the one that the king or the queen looks to as saying, I give you the power that will be to come, and you are in a place of favor. You are seated at the right hand. So everyone sort of knows that in terms of royalty and monarch language, but it's also for Jewish people known because this is the language that is used all throughout Old Testament, especially in Psalm 110. And it's been extended even into our community.
That language has come down to us.
Yes.
And say the position of the flag on the podium at the audience.
Yeah.
I visited a church that had the American flag at the right instead of the Christian flag.
Mm-hmm.
I visited only once. I said,
Yeah.
This place is not for me. Yeah.
Seated at the right hand.
The Christian flag goes to the right. Oh no, what? Right.
And because he is far above, because he is seated at the right hand, that means he's above all rule and authority, which is what? Anybody who thinks that they can rule on the earth in their community, Caesar. Jesus is far above all of that. Power and dominion. These are titles given to cosmic spiritual forces in ancient religious speculation. When you remember you hear those powers and municipalities, these are even over all the things that are sort of the puppet master of what's happening in the universe. All of those supernatural things, he's even above all of that. And above every name that is named, which is, once again, do not forget that at this time period, the name Caesar does mean God. And that Caesar named himself Caesar, and that Caesar decided that his own progeny, and those who now would rule Rome after him would be given this title because it is meant to be the overarching title of authority and rule over all dominion of persons. But Jesus' name is above every name that is named, not only in this age, but in all the ages to come. President, king, prime minister. And he has put all things under his feet and has made him the head over all things. This exaltation language is brought into comes from Psalm 8:6. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands, and you have put all things under your feet. All things under his feet, and made him the head over all things. Why? For the church, which is his body, and the fullness. This body, head body metaphor here to Christ is also found in other terms about speculation for the cosmos. In Hellenistic, the Greek Roman ways of thinking philosophically, Jewish ways of thinking about the cosmos theologically, and Gnostic thought. That whole secret understanding of the power of the universe is all put into this language of head and body. Also in Colossians 1:18, for our understanding, he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning of the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. So it is this mixing of metaphors of just how high above and how much authority and power and majesty Jesus holds, seated at the right hand of God. And this, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. The church expresses God's power and presence to the world. Alternatively, completion of the church by Christ. So we are all in the mix of that we are God's power and presence to the world, of this massive authority and power of Christ. And now you can see why they use this one for Christ the King Sunday in this lectionary to fulfill the wishes of Pope Pius #9 in establishing the Reign of Christ Sunday. That the church has the ultimate power to express God's authority. So you see how the political and the religious have sort of come to play together in this. And the Catholic Church, by the way, has always had an argument with, ever since the 3rd century when the Christianity became the rule of the empire. It was a matter of, it took over all things in terms of municipal, like kings would answer to the church. And that was just the way that the church was trying to get things to move. I studied one particular bishop, Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. And the church had sort of fallen in its power in Milan. And there was about a big breakdown, and this politician, Ambrose, was brought in to be bishop. He wasn't even Christian. So they took him and they said, well, how are we going to keep peace in the land? Let's make this guy who's the head man that everyone loves the bishop. And so they took him away for 7 days and sort of indoctrinated him in Christianity and made him bishop, baptized him on the 8th day. Mm-hmm. And he became he's a great homiletician. He's one of the great preaching fathers of the church. But there's one incident in particular that expresses how this sort of plays out. In the 4th century, Ambrose of Milan, a whole Christian confluence, Catholics, burned down a Jewish synagogue with people in it, I believe. And the Prince of Milan came because the Jewish people were so upset and they wanted somebody brought to justice about it. So the Prince of Milan came specifically to bring justice for the Jewish people among the people in Milan that had burned down this synagogue and killed these people and made such an affront to the Jewish religion. Then Ambrose of Milan held mass with the prince there and refused to offer communion until the prince offered amnesty to whoever had burned down that synagogue and killed those people. And he preached and preached and preached and preached until 4 hours later, the prince stood up and offered amnesty. And he finished his sermon and he provided communion. That's the kind of power play that literally went on within the basilica in Milan in the 4th century that typifies this power struggle between the church wanting to rule over the secular world and the secular world wanting to rule over the church. So now you see why this language is so powerful to be used to bolster this whole idea of Christ the King Sunday. And Christ the King Sunday means that the church really has all power because we express, as it says here, God's power and presence to the world. Wild, huh? What do you say, Lisa? Horrible?
Yeah, it's just as horrible as quote unquote Christians today who justify the unjustifiable based upon religion. And they're trying to force it into the political sphere by saying, I give you case in point, issues of transgender students. They're pushing discrimination in the public sphere, based upon their interpretation of scripture. It's just as horrible.
Yeah. Which is why the separation of church and state was so was such a focus of the founding of this country. We like to say, yeah, it's so that many people we can have many religions here, but it really was it was still that remnant of not having the church being able to sort of shove its morals and its ways of moving forward in this country. Because you remember the King of England at the time of the Revolution, we always forget that the King and Queen of England is the head of the Anglican Church. So our breakaway and this whole idea is much of freedom of religion is much more localized to the complexity and the reality of what was happening in the later 1700s, the last quarter of the 1700s, because everything was being justified by religious authority of this king who after King Henry VIII, because he didn't want to, he wanted a divorce, decided to make a whole new thing about religion and that he would be the head of it. So that separation of church and state has a lot to do with what was really going on in the time period, and seeing the effect of how that it played out over centuries. And we've sort of played it into this, are we a Christian nation or are we a Jewish nation? Blah, blah. It has much more to do with not allowing the moralities to go run amok with people in terms of claiming what is right and claiming what needs to be done without some sort of a way of mitigating that through conversation and through recognizing the rights of all. Wow, that was a mouthful. And again, the good news of this, however, is that Christ is seated on the right hand of God, and that whenever we worry or whenever we think that that the powers of the municipalities of the cosmos are winning in this world, we claim that Jesus is still up there and he is over all of that. And that's why we call on the name of Jesus, because that is a name above every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the age to come, which is why we end our prayers very often with what? In the name of Jesus.
Amen.
Hallelujah. And also this mandate for us to express God's power and presence to the world as the church. So the next pericope is from Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46, pericope being the section of scriptures once again. And this is the scripture in Matthew 25 that is the judgment of nations. Yeah, I'm going to read just the commentary because it's not that much. Never mind, I'll go through it. And I just want to do this one little piece of commentary before we move into this. You see this Son of Man that is already highlighted. And I wanted to clear up this notion of the Son of Man and the Son of God. Paradoxically, the title Son of Man actually refers to Christ's godly nature, alluding to the one mentioned in Daniel 7, where I didn't write that down, I didn't look into that. While the title Son of God refers to his humanity as seen in the Old Testament. Sons of God, the Son of God is the one, is the human being that is anointed by God to bring about God's purposes. Jesus takes on both of these, whereas all of the other messiahs, quote unquote, like Cyrus we talked about, who said, go and build your temple again, being used as God, that's a different way of being a Messiah. This Son of Man is this godly nature of Christ. So when the Son of Man comes in glory, and the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people, one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, come you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, who are the members of my family, you did it to me. Then he will say to those at his left hand, you that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not give me clothing, sick and in prison, you did not visit me. Then they also will answer, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you? Then he will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Whew. He will put the sheep at his right hand. Once again, this auspicious, favorable side, conducive to success in monarch language, favorable to succession. And you see all of the gifts that come to those who are at the right hand, right? What is this distinction between the sheep and the goats? I loved reading this today in my study of this particular text. The distinction between the sheep and the goats may reside in the fabrics that the two produce. The goats produce dark hair, which was used to make this, the ill-omened sackcloth. That scratchy sackcloth and ashes that everyone puts on when they're suffering, when they've done something wrong. And, they put on sackcloth and they put ashes all over them. If you remember Jonah, the entire nation was covered with sackcloth, even the cows, they put sackcloths on. That's made from goat hair. While white wool was a sign of prosperity, and wool comes from the sheep. So one is, the goats are those who represent those who are what is used to create the clothing for those who have done wrong. And wool is used to make the cloth of those who prosper and those who move forward, which puts a whole different spin besides dirty, dark, white, and clean. I loved finding that out today. Here's something else, and I'll share this with you all. As Presbyterians, our denomination embarked on several years ago the Matthew 25 initiative. And this is the text, if I'm correct, Sister Althelia, that sort of exemplifies that. And we called upon all the churches in our nation to jump on this initiative and come together and come to mind to do this. I love the idea that we were claiming that we needed to be a church that is Matthew 25. I will criticize and say what could have been done better and might have helped us a little bit better to embrace this if we would have recognized why we needed to claim to do that in the first place. Is it because we were not? Did the Presbyterian Church USA do the mea culpa enough to say we recognize that we have not been feeding, giving food and drink and welcoming the stranger, and that we are sorry for that, and that our confession is that we were like the goats, and that we are coming to that confession and God's assurance of our pardon is by saying, then do this. That was the one shift in that whole initiative that was really bothersome in my spirit. And I was only able to put it fully together in words this afternoon. To become a denomination that is Matthew 25 means that you have to do the confession and say that you weren't, and have the entire church make that confession. It's not something you can step aside and step over. and say, well, this initiative means that we're doing that. We have to do the hard work.
I suspect we are beginning to see
Mm-hmm.
that there is hard work, that we have to speak in the affirmative,
Yes, I know what you mean.
that we work towards being that Matthew 25 denomination. And one thing that is on our agenda is making Martin Luther King's, Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail,
Mm-hmm.
making that a confession.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. It's a beautiful way of really living into that. Because I remember being on the ground floor of talking about the creation of this and how to roll this out. And the whole idea that we didn't want to confess that as moving into that. And I love the fact that it took hearing the echoes and the claim to say, what do we need to do? And the letter to the Birmingham jail as a confession, which fit that quite nicely.
Yes.
And I've been praying for that for the longest time. Any other thoughts, y'all? This is Christ the King. This is what's going to happen when Christ the King comes into his glory.
Well, yeah. I was just making the connection between the epistle and Matthew and Matthew 25. And also this this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that when you were telling the story of how the church attempted and succeeded in taking over the secular government, influencing the secular government, in saying that you're a Matthew 25 church, all of those things that are listed in there actually address social justice issues.
Yeah.
And if a candidate's platform policies don't speak to that or speak and in opposition to that, then the church is going to have a problem.
Right. 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 And this is the business, this is what our business is, being the body of Christ, is doing this. And a lot of those early efforts I'll put it this way. Just remember that the church as practiced as a church of power did not come about for 300 years until an emperor had a dream that if he put crosses on the shields, that he would win a battle. And he said, if I do that, the nation will become Christian. The Roman emperor said that. And that's how Christianity became the rule of the empire. And it lost its sensibility of going from person to person to just using the rule of empire. It did, like, the empire didn't go away, grabbing other countries, having wars with people, taking people's money. That never went away. It was just the church said, now we are the empire, but the empire still did what the empire did. That's what that whole issue is. It's like, that's what's so strange about it, is that That's why I love New Testament, because it's the first 300 years of thinking, how did this ragtag group of people that were in hiding get this word spread to so many people before the empire got a hold of it? And I always think it's an issue when the empire gets a hold of it rather than the people get a hold of it. Because when the empire gets a hold of it, it uses its paradigms of order to claim what that message is, as we're seeing now. Which is why, again, there was the separation of church and state so that the empire would not sully and dirty the message of Christ. Jefferson wrote about that, as problematic as he is. Ooh, political science, religion, church history, and all in all, know that we are still called to feed the hungry, visit those in prison, so that we can do and be Christ's body. And what is that line that we are called to be? Express God's power and presence to the world.
And can I just say one thing?
You
That,
sure can.
that groups are made of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk all day about what groups don't do, what churches don't do, what principalities don't do, but they're only made up of people. And a lot of times it means that we have to do our own individual soul searching to make sure that we are Matthew 25 people individually.
Yeah.
And then when we get into places or conversations or opportunities to testify, witness, whatever the right word is, we come from a Matthew 25 position and therefore can influence the actions of groups of people. This passage said nothing about y'all. It said you, and it said I. You didn't visit me, and you didn't clothe me, and you didn't feed me, and you didn't visit me. Not you and your group or you and your church. And I think we have to individually take responsibility for that, and then be influential in our actions and words and commitment and vision and all of those things that can influence more than just one person. It can influence groups of people.
And I will say that that is really, I understand that to be the intention of I should say this in a positive light, that is really the intention of Matthew 25, was for all of the churches and all of the people in the churches to hold on to this individually, so that then we influence the body of the church, and that we then can say that we are Matthew 25 church. It's not that we claim it so that we are, but that we do exactly what you're talking about. We claim it and we start to do it individually, and then we do it in our churches, and then we do it in our synods and our presbyteries, and then all of a sudden we are the church that is moving in that direction. Oh, what a beautiful intention of that. And I still, to this day, pray that it will work. Because that's God's call for us. Oh,
ripple effect or the domino effect.
yes.
Right.
A wonderful thing to happen. But like you said at the very beginning, which was probably even more profound in the sense that we have to first confess that we haven't done it.
Yeah.
Straight away, because it seems the way it was brought to the body of Presbytery was almost like how they brought vital congregations, like it's another initiative. But so the question for some of us then became, why do we have to say we're a Matthew 25 Presbytery or a Matthew 25 church or a Matthew 25 individual, knowing that this is what God is calling us to do when we gave God a yes to following him?
Well, that's going back to that whole issue is who knows that and how do they manifest that? because, like when I was saying, there's going to be a problem when a candidate is proposing cutting maternal health centers and talking about their pro-life. Well, you can't be both. You can't be both.
I love that someone said, if you're going to be pro-life, you have to do it from the womb to the tomb.
Yes.
Exactly. Right.
And then they get on TV or whatever, and they say, I'm a Christian, I believe in God, and and all of this stuff. And then the next thing out of their mouth, they talk about cutting education, cutting Social Security and Medicare, cutting maternal health, and all of these things, the child tax credit, and all of these things. And I'm like, how does that mesh with what we're reading in Matthew 25?
It really doesn't. And it doesn't even mesh with the Old Testament when it says, well, what does God call us to do? What? To do justice.
Mm-hmm.
Do justice. And if you're doing justice within the context of government, then you will enact laws or policies that are going to feed the hungry, right? That are going to house those who are homeless. You're going to do justice so that the majority of the people who are disenfranchised, who are living below cost of living, can then get what they need, and in getting what they need, begin to be uplifted so that all of society is uplifted, and it's not just 10% of the pie.
I want us all, as we move from this space, but never from God's presence, I want us to hear all the problems that we've lifted up and all of the issues that we've lifted up, even the political nature and the religio-political nature of the naming of this feast day, Christ the King Sunday, all of the stuff that we've lifted up, and think about how important it is that it's the last Sunday of the liturgical year, because now we're waiting for Christ. We start all over again, waiting for that hope to be born. And the lectionary has placed us in a space where we are now thinking about how troubled the world can be and is, so that our Advent journey moves into the birth of Christ's promise.
New hope, new hope. Thank you.
So hold on to this, what is going on in all of this angst, and may it fuel our Advent, which starts next week.
Mhm.
Woo!
Oh, thank you.
Be to God, y'all. We did
God.
it. We did it. We went through year A, and we'll start out after Advent with year B. Gracious God, we say hallelujah and thank you for carrying us on this journey with one another, and for lifting us up and ending us at a space where we know that we cannot wait for you to come. Whether it's your birth or it's your return, we will just wait and celebrate the birth of hope realized, so that it is not all in vain. Bless us, O God, love us and keep us, be with us now and forever. And may we be thankful this day, this week, for all you have done, all you have placed in front of us, and all the people and churches and things in our lives, so that we may bring them forward to love and to embrace with the new hope that is to come. In Jesus' name we pray these things.